readings today come from both the Old and the New Testament. First reading is from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. And from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. Be bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, through all, and in all. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Dolly. So, I feel like I have to admit that as I begin this Father's Day message, I feel completely unqualified because I'm not a father, not a man. And I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of the male experience. And so I speak to you on this Father's Day from the perspective, I guess, of a wife and of a daughter. And what I need to tell you today, men, and what I need for you to hear is that you matter. You matter so incredibly much. You matter in your home, and you matter in your job, and you matter in this church. And you have no idea just how much you matter. And in the realm of the series that we've been working on these last few weeks, Practically Christian, What Matters, the leadership that God has entrusted to you matters tremendously. I have a really great dad. Some of you have had the privilege to meet him in the last couple of months, and Kendall and we're actually really excited because tomorrow this time we'll be on a plane headed to Arizona to visit with him for the week. And I recognize that I'm really fortunate because even though my parents divorced when I was just a baby, my dad has always been involved in my life. He attended every performance, every school function. He committed to staying in my hometown until I graduated from high school. And as dads are supposed to do, he taught me a whole lot of lessons. Things like keep your eye on the ball. No, it's not okay to spit on your brother. And if you leave a lame note that says you're out with friends, I'll be waiting for you in the driveway when the boy you snuck off with brings you home. True story. In all seriousness, I owe a lot of my strength and my work ethic and my independence to my dad because he has always encouraged and supported me and set healthy, loving boundaries on my behavior. And he always listened with his entire heart to my hopes and my dreams and my frustrations. And so I'm a lucky girl to have a father who is so committed to being a part of my life, even though we never shared the same home that I can remember. But as an adult, I now recognize that there is one thing that my dad didn't teach me. You see, my dad didn't teach me about a relationship with Jesus Christ because he didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I often wonder how some of my choices might have been different if he had. And you might be thinking, well, you turned all right, you're up here talking to us about God and about faith, and, I do so with wounds and with scars from personal battles that maybe I hadn't have had to face if that relationship with my dad had been a little bit different. So men, hear me today that you are so, so, so important. And I don't envy men one bit. I have no desire to be a man. You carry huge responsibilities that have been placed on you by God and that are placed on you by this world and our culture. And before I go further with this, let me assure you that I believe in what John Piper calls the equality of personhood. You know, Genesis 1 tells us that God made both man and woman in his image, which means that I am equally in his image, men, as you are. And ladies, so are you. And that means that we are to be of equal value and shown equal respect and equal dignity. But I believe God is an intentional creator. And I cannot ignore that man was created first and that God gave him the directive: you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die. God did not give this directive to Eve, and though she was the first to eat the apple after being deceived by Satan, whom did God seek and question when he came to find them in the garden? It was Adam. Eve is held accountable as well. But it is Adam that God questions. And what that says to me is that God created with the intention that men are to be the moral and spiritual leader of the family. That God expected Adam to share his instructions and expectations with Eve. And because Adam failed to do that, sin entered the world. Yeah, it's all your fault, guys. Men, you carry a whole lot on your shoulders. God expects you to lead your family. And then there's culture with very specific definitions of masculinity that feed off of this primal instinct for men to provide and to protect. And I think we put a lot of pressure on men to be models of physical and emotional strength, fearless and capable of bearing all burdens and fixing all broken things with duct tape and a little elbow grease. And little boys grow up with the message that tenderness and tears are weakness, that might makes right, and that aggression is manly. Culture, it seems, expects you to carry your family, and that's a lot of weight for one man to have to bear. I think such pressure has to be overwhelming. And I can understand why some men simply run away from that responsibility, leaving a hurting family in the wake. And I can understand why some turn to substance abuse and other addictions to numb that pressure. And I can understand why marriage can be so hard and fatherhood can be so hard. Because God calls you to be leaders in a needy, broken world and in needy, broken families. And you have to decide if you will answer that call despite the demands that culture places on you as well. Despite the upbringing that you may have had, despite the role model you may or may not have had in your own father. And as we talk a little bit about leadership in the home, I understand that not every man in here is a father. Some of you are single. Some of you are childless by choice or by circumstance. Some of you are grandfathers. And of course, many of you, like myself, are women. But before you tune me out because it seems that this message isn't for you, let's not forget that we are a church family. That last week, Chris just shared with us that to God, community matters, and that we are meant to be a support, that we are to support one another in our efforts to grow in faith. And it is each of our responsibilities to come alongside one another and listen and encourage those who are striving to live out God's design. So this message is for all of us, whether we are meant to take it and apply it personally or support someone else along their journey to apply it. So let me give you some insight into just how much a father's spiritual leadership matters in the home. I think I've shared with you before some of the things that I've read through Sticky Faith research from the Fuller Youth Institute, which is an organization that really advocates faith transmission in young adults and families. And one area of research that I find the most compelling is the significance of fathers and father figures, in establishing faith that sticks. You see, their studies indicate, and take this for what it's worth, that 71% of youth are likely to adopt the family faith when they have a close relationship, what they call a warm relationship, to their father. The numbers are much smaller when we talk about their mothers. The maternal connection is not as significant in faith transmission as the paternal connection. Fathers, you matter, 71%. In fact, a child's perception of family warmth has a greater impact on adopting the family faith than any other relational factor. And the research shows, dads, that your children will likely adopt what they perceive as your level of faith, not necessarily what you perceive as your level of faith. So what that means is they're watching your actions, and they're listening to your words, and they're waiting to see, are the two going to match up? So men, if you say faith in Jesus is important, but your kids never see you study the Bible, never hear you pray over them, never witness you serving, what is their perception? It's that perception that matters. And notice the term close relationship, warm relationship. It's not just about physical presence, but emotional connection. What are your conversations like with your children? Do you make time for them? Do they perceive, whether it's reality or not, that they can come to you with their questions and their doubts and their choices without fear of consequence? How do you treat their questions and concerns? Where do your kids fit into your list of priorities? All of these matter in how kids perceive their relationships. And the truth is, let's face it, our perception is our personal reality, right? Our scripture from Deuteronomy 6 gives us some insight into how faith transmission happens in a warm family relationship. And you may have noticed that conversation is the key. Notice that Moses mentions nothing about lecture, nothing about sitting them down for a good old family talking about the Bible, but rather conversation built into the daily rhythms and routines of the family. Talk about it when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. In practical terms, use the time and experiences that you have together to talk about life, to share your world, and discover how God is active in each day. Prioritize family time and prioritize one-on-one time with your kids. Send encouraging text messages. Pray over your children as they leave for school and as they go to bed. And consider that even the most mundane moments when they're filled with warmth and with intention, those become the memories that your children are going to take into adulthood. Not necessarily the big family vacations, not the huge events. It's the day-to-day conversations and the day-to-day moments where they knew that they were loved by you. If you take seriously the call to lead your family by God's design, those memories will be critical to lasting faith in your kids. And I'm aware that many of you are grandparents. I've proudly seen pictures and met some of those grandkids and great-grandkids. And maybe you're feeling relieved because you're like, whew, well, my children are grown and gone, so I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. Or maybe you're feeling a little bit disheartened because your own children have not followed the path that you tried to lay for them. But you need to know that your work is not done, because you too, grandparents, great-grandparents, have tremendous impact on the faith of your grandchildren, and you may not even recognize it. In fact, even when researchers, when they statistically control for parents' faith influence, whether the parents are great at transmitting faith or horrible at transmitting faith, grandparents, grandfathers especially, have a separate and independent impact on their grandkids' faith. So it means that it doesn't matter what your kids are doing. You have your own influence over your grandkids. And we often don't think that, right? The kids are out of the house. Those grandkids are their kids. Bring them to me. We'll play for a little while, and then I'll send them back home. And it's better being a grandparent. If I had known it was so great, I'd have been a grandparent the first time, right? I hear that. But you matter. And it means that you might be supporting the already great efforts of your children. Your kids may be rock stars in their faith and may be leading your grandkids in exactly the path that you would like them to be led. So maybe you're just supporting that. It may mean that you're supplementing what your kids are doing in their homes. Maybe they're trying, they're going to church, but the faith talks aren't really happening, and so you're kind of stepping in and guiding. But it may mean that you're working to counteract the damage that your own kids are doing. And that happens through simple things that build your relationship together. Teaching your grandkids about their heritage, sharing in special family traditions, sending special notes of blessing. One of the dearest things that I have from my grandparents are cards and notes that they wrote to me at graduations and different times like that. Teaching them a new skill or letting them teach you a new skill. Do you know what that could do for your relationship with your grandkids and your great-grandkids when they get the chance to teach you something? You might learn how to use that smartphone after all, right? These things are tricky. Just don't disappear, because you too matter in the transmission of faith. So it shouldn't surprise us that fathers and father figures have such an impact on kids and their faith, because it is all part of God's grand design. The father is to be the spiritual leader in the home. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, tell that to my wife. Or maybe you're thinking, I'm not qualified to lead in anything spiritual. Have you seen my past? Do you know anything about me? And here's my response, and I speak from experience. Men, whether she expresses it or not, your wife or your future partner, at her core, wants you to lead the family. She does. There is an inborn, God-created, biological desire, regardless of her experience, regardless of her education level, regardless of her self-sufficiency or past, for you to lead with godly initiative. Not to lead the way you want, but to lead with godly initiative. And if you're single, heads up, guys, because this is coming your way, so start preparing for it now. Men, if you feel unqualified to lead in spiritual matters in your home, there is one who empowers you when you tap into a relationship with him. That's the whole point. He knows you're unqualified. He knows you can't do it on your own. That's why he's there, to have a relationship with you and teach you how to do it. And I imagine he's likely given you a partner not to lord over, but to consult with and make decisions together regarding your family and your home. Paul tells us in Ephesians 5 that the marriage relationship is to emulate the relationship between Christ and the church. Men are to love their wives as Christ loves the church. And we know in the end that Christ, he died for the church. His love was sacrificial in response to her needs. And marriage is to be a relationship of mutual submission, which in context has nothing to do with domination or mindless obedience. That has everything to do with working together to create a household that seeks and honors God and his divine plan for the family. So what does that mean in practical terms? How do we live this out? Well, first we have to remember we can only lead others as far down the road as we've traveled ourselves. And so when you leave here today, the question you have to ask is how is my relationship with God? If you don't have a relationship with God through his son, Jesus Christ, you are incapable of fulfilling God's intention for you. Do you know Jesus? And more importantly, does Jesus know you? And if not, what do you need to do to change in order to develop that relationship? Because your family needs you to have that relationship. And secondly, we have to remember that God provides the perfect model for leadership in his son, Jesus Christ. What we see in Jesus is a model of invitation to follow, not demand or brutish bullying. A model of seeking and dependence on God, not proud self-sufficiency. We see a model of servanthood, not expectation for things in return. A model of forgiveness, not grudge-bearing. a model of mentoring, of walking through life together, not abandonment. And this is what is so attractive about Jesus. This leadership model is gentle yet firm. It's tender but authoritative, loving but not passive or weak. And it's a model that shows confidence in God's power and his authority and his divine design. Jesus had the power and authority to make people do what he wanted, but instead he led his people as a shepherd his flock. So I guess today what I'm really doing is calling you to the mat. Men, do you accept this responsibility that God has designed since day one for you? Will you lead your families through the power of the Holy Spirit in your own lives? Will you demonstrate the kind of leadership that made Jesus so compelling and so different from the world around him? And if you don't have children, will you step in as a godly father figure to the many children in our lives whose fathers are absent? Because fathers are important and they need you, whether they are your own or not. Will you show boys what a godly man looks like and how he acts? And will you show them that love and faith are not weakness, but the greatest strengths that a man can possess? And will you show girls what a godly man looks like and how he acts? Will you show them that godly men love their souls and their minds more than and before he ever loves their bodies? Men, you matter. You matter today, and the direction that you lead your family will matter for eternity. Amen.